Greetings. Thanks for joining me for the fourth part of this special topics talk, Making Magnificently Good Graphs in SPSS. This is the final part after R and SAS. I'm Dr. Mark Williamson. Let's jump into our overview. Like we did for R and SAS, we'll cover how to make great looking graphs in SPSS now. And we'll start by creating basic graphs and then exploring how to upgrade them by modifying various elements. We've already done that in the two previous talks. The 5 elements I'll look at are labels, axes, colors and shapes, dots, lines and text, and then other. However, unlike in the other talks, I had code I was working with. SPSS, a lot of how you work in it is through drop-down menus, so instead I'll be showing screenshots of the various procedures. Now, if you haven't already taken the pre-test, I'd implore you to do that now. You can get the SPS dataset I'm using if you'd like to follow along. As I did for SAS, I created a special dataset that uses the dataset from R as well, so that all 3 of these talks uses more or less the same data. And then finally, you can get the PDF of the slides I'm presenting there. And as for the other 2, R and SAS, I've provided a kind of fun treat at the end, special kind of secret treat. That is no different. SPS will have a nice summative treat for you, for those brave enough to plod their way through all such talks. All right, to get set up, again, I'll be using SPSS. Typically, all of what I'll be doing is in what's called the chart builder. So that's, if you see here, if you pull up SPSS, this is like a data set, and then if you go to this graph pull down and then click chart builder, that's what's going on. Then that'll be how we start and edit most of these graphs. However, there's also a chart editor that when you either double click or click right and then go through the drop down to chart editor, that's how you get that from a already created graph. Okay, without further ado, let's get into histograms, our favorite summative graphic. For a simple histogram, you'll go into the chart builder. Now, just a quick intro to how a chart builder works. You have to open this up within the data set you want. So luckily for you, the data set I've included has all the variables we need from all the previous data. The possible data is shown here. This is sort of the schematic of the graph you want, and then there's these different graph options. And once you've selected a graph, say the histogram here, there's sub options. So for a simple histogram, we just select this, and then we put our variable that we want here. In this case, it'll be Nile. And that's really all you do to it. You click OK, and it'll produce a simple histogram of our Nile data. Now, with a two-way histogram, it's going to be very similar. However, in addition to throwing down our height variable from Star Wars character heights, we'll also go over to this section and have the columns panel selection. And in that columns panel selection, we will put gender, which will produce a graph like this, a paneled histogram. Now, if you've looked at R and SAS talks I've already done, you'll notice that this is a little bit different from those where they were actually an overlapping histogram. For SPSS, there doesn't appear to be a simple way to do that. I think you can do that by manipulating code, but heck, if you're going to be coding everything anyways, you might as well be using SAS or R rather than SPSS. So for the kind of drop-down version that we want, this is going to be Good enough. Well then, moseying our way on to upgrading those histograms. Let's take a look at our simple histogram. First of all, one of the things you can do is going over to this section here on titles and footnotes. A lot of these have by default titles or footnotes. You can turn them on or off. For the most part, I'll be turning them off to clean things up. And then secondly, over on this section here under these element properties, if I select bar, I can do different things, including displaying a normal curve, which is what I would like to do here. Then in addition, if you go to the x-axis, I can change things like the label name, which I have done here. Then finally, if I go over chart appearance, things are getting a little bit messy here, so bear with me. You can change colors, which I actually did here. With all that, I get a nice flow rate of Nile River. And I think one thing I forgot to mention here, I also set my limits of my x-axis from 0 to 1500 to stretch that out. And then other things I forgot to mention here, some things I can do here is some kind of cleanup, making things look nicer. I took out grid lines as well as having an inner frame, so that frames it nicely. Now with the two-way histogram, we can do all sorts of similar things. So for example, if I go to the bar, I'll have a normal curve, just do little dots here to keep it from getting too messy. I'll also can do things with the title as well as the chart appearance. I'm going to change the color and have these settings set up with no grid lines and an inner frame, and we get a nice looking graph like this. So there you have it. That's all we need to do for histograms. All right, so with that, I have some exploration with you. And just as a general note for this talk, I will have fewer quizzes and animated summaries compared to R and SAS, just because there's a little bit less of learning kind of going on, a little bit more of just drop down, plug and shock. So I'll be extolling you to explore a little more to get more familiar with it, rather than quizzing you or whatnot. So the exploration I'd like you to start with is using the height and gender panel. Sorry, the height as an x-axis and gender as the panel axis. So this two-way histogram like we did. Try comparing it between rows and column paneling. So for this example here, we use column, but try row and see what the difference looks like. See which one looks better, which ones you would prefer. That is your exploration orders. Moseying right along, we've got our box plots. So with our simple box plot, we're going to again be in Chart Builder. Select box plot and then this first box here for simple box plot. We'll move on to the next data set, and if you've kind of noticed, I've broken them up so that the specific data set will be separated by breaks, so you can kind of get into where each of the data sets are delimited. So for a simple box plot, we're going to have feed as our x variable, and then weight as our y variable from the data set chick weights. And producing that gives us a simple box plot of weight by feed. To do a two-way box plot, very similar, but now you're going to select this middle box, and then date is going to be our x variable, vitamin C is going to be our y variable. This is from the cabbage data set, and then now that we have this two-way, there's this clustering variable, also known in R as kind of our fill, or in SAS as our group, whatever you want. That's going to be our cultivar. And when we do that, we have clustered box plot of vitamin C by date by cult. So you can see here that at least starting out, it's really nice to have these titles automated because they're very descriptive. As we move on farther, we of course can take them out as we want to make spiffier and spiffier graphs. So to upgrade our simple box plot, we can do the sorts of things we've already shown how to do, like taking out titles, changing the label of the x-axis. We can also do that for the y-axis. And then, of course, changing our colors. And then we get that here. But we're not done yet. Now we're going to move on to the chart editor. So if you have your graph here, you, like I've already mentioned, can either double click or right click and go to edit content, then in separate window. That'll bring us to a simple window that'll kind of pop up like this called a chart editor. We can work in there. One of the first things we can do if we want to is we can do this section here. Once selected, we can actually click on data labels like these outliers and actually take off the data label, because normally we probably don't want that. Okay. Then really what we can do is we can select any sort of elements and pop up a properties window, or a lot of times we can use drop-down menus. Within the properties menu, there's different kind of sub-menus. Here, we're looking at categories, and what we want to actually do here is sort them so they go from low to high. So we can see by default, they're not ordered low to high. Here, if we do ascending, we'll get them low to high. So that's what we can do by doing this and then doing apply. Additionally, if we go to labels and ticks, this is now for the axes. We can set them. For example, if we want to set them through. And again, labels and ticks through. And we can see here now that we have a nicer graph. We've got them in ascending order, and our ticks are through. Okay, so that was an introduction to the chart editor, which will be our friend as we move forward. Now, what if we want to use a two-way box plot? What if we want to upgrade that? Well, again, you can do sorts of things in the chart builder, mostly with labels and such, and of course colors. And since we have two different categories, we've done this before in R and SAS, we want to make our different cultivars, our cabbage, green and purple. And that's nice, but we're not done yet. Again, we'll go to our new friend, the chart editor, and we'll start working on them. So now in the earlier one, I just kind of showed you the property pop-up. Now I'm going to show you the image as well, so you can see what you need to select to do that. So for example, you see these highlighted labels. I can go here and I can do all sorts of things with them, including text style, change the font, the style, the size, the color, and everything. So we're going to make those bigger. Same thing with our axes label. You can change things. Same with y-axes, and of course our labels. And we can actually set the origin, set the increments from here as well. And then when we're down here, another thing we're going to do is, now that I've selected the actual bars themselves, it's kind of hard to see the outline, but they're here. You can do things with, we've already done the fill, but we can do things with the border. You see these ones here, they're clear or like no border, but I can give them a nice black border. And additionally, you've seen that these are thicker. You can go to these bar options and play around with the spacing and clustering so that you can thicken up your bars. And then finally, I'm going to go to text style as well, And I've decided that these y-axis labels were a little too small, and in fact I even want to tilt them a little bit, give them a bit of a rakish angle. So I do that, and whoop, I misspoke. I'm not done yet. I'm also going to deal with that tipping here rather than the previous subsection. All that combined gives me a little nicer graph. So with the idea of box plots really in your head, your exploration is to go back to this data set that we've plotted here, and instead of using ascorbic acid, use head weight to make a box plot, and then try to make these boxes as large as possible. I made them a bit bigger. See what sort of limits you can play with there. Okay. If you've gone through the R portion, you are probably trembling in your boots by now with these bar plots, because you know that in R at least, it ended up being a lot more work to do bar plots compared to the other two. But fear not. SPSS is just as simple as box plots. You simply click bar, this first one, and then there you go. This is species as our X variable, and then our sepal length, this is this iris, the flower data set, to get this here. So not too bad at all. Two-way just takes a different box selection, and then your usual suspects of X variable, Y variable, and clustered variable to get our wool as the X variable, our mean breaks as the Y variable, and our tension as the clustering variable. And there we go. Whew, with that load off your mind about how easy bar plots are, let's spend a little bit of that nervous energy that we had built up improving them a little bit. So with the simple bar plot, again, we can take out titles, we can change things with the bars themselves, we can change the y-axis name, and change the colors to get something like this. But now I'm going into the chart editor, and I'm going to make nice thick borders. Thicken that up if you'd like. I can go to the confidence intervals. I can change and thicken those up. I can even add a reference line. And one thing you can do here, it's actually, you see there's a bunch of icons. You can hover over them, and when the reference line comes up, you can get that. Or you can get this through the drop down. I want the position just say to be at 5 here. And of course I can do all sorts of things to the reference line, including changing the color. And there you have it, a pretty nice updated bar plot. All right, inspired with that confidence, let's move forward with the two-way. Again, change things with titles and axes and coloring. And now here, this is going to be our stat hack for the talk. We can go into the chart editor and manually change the ordering around. You might be telling yourself, but Mark, you've already done this when we had the chick weights and we ordered the weights of the different feeds in an ascending sequence. Yes, that's great, but you could do that in other ways. The really nice thing about this category section in our properties is that not only can you do it in ascending or descending and so forth, you can manually move things around to any single order you like, which is great for this because we have low, medium, and high tension, which if you sort by ascending or descending, you'll just do it alphabetically or reverse alphabetically, which still won't solve our problem. So you can go and do this manually, low, medium, high, and voila, we can get what we want. And of course, going on things. We can add nice black borders to things and give us a slick little graph here, going from low, medium, to high, exactly what we want, so on and so forth. With that, I'd like you to explore a little more on your own. Now, I've shown you in these bar plots clustered ones. Try to see if you can create the same data here using a stacked bar plot. See what it looks like, see if it's any better, any worse, what your preferences are. Give that a go-see. We are cruising right along, happy little steamboats, to get to the scatter plots. Simple scatter plot is not too bad at all. In SPSS, we get our scatter, / dot, and what the heck, let's do the second one, which will give us a best fit line. And with distance as the x variable and speed as the y variable, we put in here, we get this out. Now to get this line, you're going to have to make sure you have your linear fit line being here. There's total, and there's also a thing called like subgroups. Now, unless you have multiple groups, this is going to be available, and the automatic is going to be this total. So make sure this box is checked. Now, if we want a 2-sample scatter plot, we can go to this one here, and a little work here, and again, having a linear fit line of total, we can get carapace length for our crabs and carapace width, and then separated by female and male, this sex as our clustered or grouped, as I think they're calling it for scatter plots here. So great, not too bad. Let's upgrade these puppies. As always, we can change titles and footnotes, labels, colors, voila, jump into our editor, grab these y-axis labels and play around with them. And these x-axis labels, play around with them. And then one thing we'd like to do here is we can click on this line. And now, if you click on it, you can actually attach a label to line, so you get your equation in the line, which is kind of nice to present. However, I don't like how it sets it up right here. So what I do like to do here is bring this up, then write this information down somewhere in like a text file or whatever, and then uncheck this box so it disappears, and then I can go and create a text box either through the drop down or this little text icon here, and then I can type that equation in. I can change properties like whether it's bold or not, size, and then I can manually move it around. I'm going to put it over here, and then we'll get our graph here. Here's that equation that I put. There's also what was automatically generated, the r squared. That was, I think, up here. I moved it down here so it's all kind of there in one. So not too shabby. With the 2-sample, again, you can change things in here as well as color. And now this one's kind of nice because we can change it to pink and blue to more match sex rather than sort of blue and green, which don't. Anyways, you get the point. I can change my x-axis label, y-axis label, and then we go here. Again, I am going to select this fit line, and then click and unclick the label to line so I can get the equation of the line. And one thing here is you can add, change things to the line. And then if you want to change specifically the dots for each group, you can click right on them. You can see here I can change the type, size, and so forth. So I'm going to do some changing around here, as well as you can do things with the border. I'm going to make them all smaller. Now, one thing to note, you can do confidence intervals it seems like, in this, like we've seen in R and SAS. However, when I've put them, they don't really look very good. They kind of just look like a bunch of lines. So I would avoid doing those for an SPSS plot, at least until you can kind of figure out maybe on your own if there's a better way to do it, or just, like, again, probably if you're doing a slick, highly statistical graph, you probably use R or SAS anyways. But anyways, after we've done everything, get our equation of the line, move it around, and there we go. And here's our final graph. And now the cool thing here is we have different colors and also different shapes for our male and female. And of course, if you had a real gumption, you could change the size too, though that probably would throw things, wouldn't really look very good because the size isn't really telling you anything quantitative. Anyways, I digress. So I have our little Kahoot test I put together. You can take out the link here, or there should be links in the description below, so you can give that a try. Now we've sidled on to the other plots section. Now this will be a bit different from R and SAS because, one, while spaghetti plot is pretty much the same, the logistic regression that we normally do doesn't really work, at least plotting it in SPSS. You can do the statistical analyses, but it seemed like there wasn't an easy, straightforward way to plot that line. So once again, if things are really complicated and possibly take manual coding, why do an SPSS when you can do it in SAS or R? And then two, it also turns out that bubble plots, it's through looking at some of the references, it looks like there should be a way to do a bubble plot, but at least my version didn't really have a clear or intuitive way. So instead, I'm substituting that for a 3D scatter plot. So that's just some pitfalls to look into. Not everything works the same between software programs. All right, get into a spaghetti plot. We'll do a line one. We'll just do it. I believe we'll need the second one. Yes, second one, because we have groups. And with our data set, we want in our X variable here, we want group. Our Y variable, we want extra. And then our kind of clustering, our ID variable is ID. And that gives us that pretty simple. Now 3D scatter plot is under scatter. It's going to be, we could do a couple different ways. What I'm going to do is this one here, so I can have essentially an X variable, a Y variable, and a Z variable. But on top of that, I also have a categorical variable here. So engine size, horsepower, RPM, those are all numerical variables, so they can go on the axes, X, Y, and Z, and then I'll color it by type. So this is car data, type of car. It's colored. So there we go. Okay, let's upgrade our spaghetti plot here. Again, as always, you're tired of me telling this, you can change title things, you can change your X axis, and now to actually change the label, what they say, you can't really do this in the editor or builder. You could manually change the data itself, but instead I'm going to do a little shortcut and include in the actual label a little key. And then for the y-axis, I'll change the label, change the color, and now since we have 10 different groups in our ID, we can these 10 different categories can be changed as we like. And we get here, start working in the editor. You can see here now that I have this drug 1 equals 4 before, 2 equals after. That's a kind of a cheap way to give more information without having to manually change all the 1s to before and all the 2s to after. Of course, I can go in and say this legend. I can add a border, and that looks good enough for me, so I'll keep it simple like that. Now, if we want to upgrade our 3D scatterplot, we of course can do that. Again, we can change titles and colors of our different categories, which we'll do here. Go into the editor, we can actually move around our legend, which I'll move it down here. And then we select the dots themselves. You can change kind of the distancing to kind of fit a little better. Now, you can also, in these properties bars, add these sort of drop lines or like wireframes to kind of frame it to the bottom, which can be useful to interpret. However, because they're a bunch of different colors, those lines will all be different colors, and that kind of makes it messy, so I'm going to kind of keep it clean here. And finally, I can go to my legend, the different categories, and I can, again, as we did for the low, medium, high tension in the warp breaks data, we can manually put these in the order we want, and I kind of did that so they kind of have a more interpretable sense, like compact car, then a small, then a mid-size, then a large, and the van, and then sporty kind of off on its own. And then we get a scatter plot like that. All right, you might be tired of exploration, but dust off that old hat and get back out there. Try creating other types of graphs, now that I've shown several, using the chart builder and any of the example data we have here. So you could try an area graph, high-low graph, maybe even a dual axes graph. The world is your statistical oyster on this exploration. Okay, so we are nearing the end of our time here. Please try out the post-test and survey. Again, the survey covers all the talks, Introduction, R, SAS, and SPSS, so this would be a great time to take this if you just finished watching all of these talks. And as I told you, I do have a special treat. Now, it doesn't really make sense to do what we did for R and SAS, where I had the special code. So instead, I have a ranking chart for SPSS, SAS, and R across the types of graphs that we used. You can access this here, but I have kind of a miniaturized version of it to show you here. And unfortunately for SPSS, lo and behold, it is what I would consider third place overall. However, in its benefit, you can see that I think it far and above makes the easiest bar plot if you want a quick and accurate bar plot. So anyways, that is that for you. And now I will kind of transition out with a quick summary of everything in SPSS before I get to the references and acknowledgements. Not a lot of references here, but hopefully they help you. I kind of included these first two. I didn't really use, but these are nice kind of basics of getting in and using SPSS to kind of get your feet wet, and then this is something that I actually use to help myself. Finally, again, I'm part of the DaCCoTA Cancer Collaborative and Translational Activity. I hope this was helpful and useful. We are funded through an NIH award, so please cite us if we helped you. Thank you very much, and good night.